My name is Eileen, and I'm 56 years old, a widow living in Boston, with memories of what once was a close relationship with my daughter, Jessica. For years, we shared everything until she met Blake, and slowly she became someone I barely recognized. Nothing prepared me for the day she told me I wasn't invited to her wedding, to keep it intimate. The very same day, she asked me to help cover the $30,000 catering bill. What she didn't know was that I had already secretly paid for the venue flowers and photographer as a surprise gift. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever had to make a difficult decision about a family relationship, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I handled this heartbreaking situation. Trust me, sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that teach us our own worth. The morning my husband Tom died was deceptively beautiful. Clear blue September sky, leaves just beginning to turn gold at the edges. He kissed me goodbye, grabbed his hard hat and headed out to the construction site where he'd worked as a foreman for 15 years. 4 hours later, I got the call about the crane accident that took him instantly. Just like that, at 48 years old, I became a widow with 2 grieving children to support Jessica, who was 22, and just starting graduate school, and Michael, who was 19 and in his sophomore year of college. The first year was a blur of paperwork, insurance claims, and trying to hold myself together enough to be there for my children. Jessica temporarily moved back home from her grad program in marketing, deferring for a semester to help me navigate the darkness of those early months. She would make sure I ate, would sit with me during those long sleepless nights when grief felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. Michael withdrew more, burying himself in his engineering studies across the country, calling weekly with a voice that sounded more strained each time. "Mom, do you need me to come home?" he would ask. "No, sweetheart," I'd always answer. "Focus on your studies, Dad would want that." I was determined not to let Tom's death derail our children's futures. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much for that to happen. Thankfully, Tom had been meticulous about life insurance and had built up a decent retirement fund. Between that and my job as an English literature professor at a small liberal arts college in Boston, we would be okay financially. Not wealthy by any means, but stable enough that I could keep our modest colonial home in the suburbs and help the kids finish their education without crippling debt. As the initial shock of grief settled into a more manageable ache, Jessica and I grew even closer than before. Unlike Michael, who had always been more like his father, practical, reserved, self-sufficient, Jessica and I shared a special bond. From the time she was small, with her curious blue eyes and endless questions, we had been confidants. I had been there for every milestone in her life, sewing sequins on tutus at 2 in the morning for ballet recitals, driving her to piano lessons twice a week for 8 years, staying up all night helping her prepare for debate competitions. When she was accepted to an Ivy League school for her undergraduate degree, I framed the acceptance letter and hung it in our living room right next to the family photos. "Mom, that's embarrassing," she had protested, but I could see the pride in her eyes. "I'm showing it off to everyone who visits," I had insisted. "My brilliant daughter. Your father would have been bursting with pride." Tom had only completed high school before going straight into construction work, but he had been fiercely proud of Jessica's academic achievements. He used to brag about her to everyone at work sites, showing pictures of her in her debate team blazer or at piano recitals. "My girl's going to run a company someday," he'd tell his coworkers. "Or maybe be president. Mark my words." After graduate school, Jessica landed a prestigious marketing position at a major firm in downtown Boston. With her sharp mind, striking looks, and natural charisma, she quickly began moving up the corporate ladder. Despite her busy schedule, we maintained our Sunday tradition: brunch at a little cafe near my home where we'd catch up on her work stories, her apartment hunt, and her dating life, which until Blake had been a series of brief casual relationships with ambitious young professionals like herself. None of them challenge me, Mom, she confided during one of our brunches. They're nice enough, but there's no spark, no real connection. I want what you and Dad had, someone who makes me want to be better, you know. I understood completely. What Tom and I had wasn't perfect. We had our arguments and rough patches like any couple. But there had been a deep, abiding respect and love that formed the foundation of everything. He had been my best friend, my partner in all things. I wanted nothing less for my daughter. Michael, meanwhile, had settled in Seattle after college, working for an aerospace engineering firm. He called regularly, but visited rarely, claiming his demanding job made travel difficult. When he did come home for holidays, he was polite but distant, as if being in the house without his father was something he could only endure in small doses. I tried not to take it personally. We all grieve differently, and for Michael, moving forward meant creating physical distance from the reminders of what we'd lost. "He's still processing, Mom," Jessica would assure me. "He'll come around eventually." Our lives had settled into a new normal when Jessica first mentioned Blake. It was during one of our Sunday brunches, and I noticed immediately how her eyes lit up when she spoke his name. "He's a bit older, 35, she said, stirring her coffee. "He owns a financial consulting firm downtown. We met at a networking event last month, and he asked for my number right away." "He sounds impressive," I remarked, genuinely happy to see her excited about someone. "When do I get to meet this Blake?" "Soon," she promised. "He's really busy with a big client right now, but I've told him all about you." 3 weeks later, Jessica brought Blake to dinner at my home. He arrived in a luxury car that looked wildly out of place in my middle-class neighborhood, dressed in what I was sure was a designer suit. Tall, conventionally handsome, with perfectly styled dark hair and an artificially white smile, he scanned my modest living room with barely concealed judgment. "Lovely place," he said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Jessica mentioned you've lived here for some time." 25 years, I confirmed. "Tom and I bought it just before Jessica was born. We'd just started to renovate the kitchen when he passed." "Ah, yes. Jessica mentioned your husband was in construction." The way he said construction, as if it were synonymous with unskilled labor, made something inside me bristle. Tom had been a highly skilled foreman who had worked his way up from apprentice, trusted with multi-million-dollar projects and the safety of dozens of workers. Throughout dinner, Blake answered calls on his expensive phone, apologizing each time with practiced insincerity. He picked at the pot roast I'd prepared, Jessica's favorite, asking if the meat was organic and if I'd used grass-fed butter in the mashed potatoes. When I served the apple pie for dessert, he declined, patting his flat stomach. "Have to watch the carbs," he explained. "Jessica and I are doing a cleanse together, actually. This is her cheat day." I glanced at my daughter, who had always loved my apple pie, but was now eyeing it with something like guilt. She took a small piece, eating just a few bites before pushing it away. As they were leaving, Blake handed me his business card, heavy stock with raised lettering and a subtle shimmer. "If you ever need financial advice," he said, "I'd be happy to take a look at your portfolio. Jessica mentioned you're planning for retirement in a few years." "That's very kind," I replied, taking the card. "But I've been working with Tom's financial planner for years. She's been wonderful." A flash of something, annoyance, disrespect, crossed his face before his practiced smile returned. "Of course. But the offer stands. I work with some well-established clients who have seen impressive returns even in this market." After they left, I sat in my quiet kitchen, trying to understand the unease I felt. On paper, Blake seemed like what any mother would want for her daughter: successful, ambitious, apparently interested in her future. But something about him felt off, as if he were performing the role of successful boyfriend rather than genuinely connecting with Jessica or showing interest in her family. I pushed the feeling aside. Jessica was smart and discerning. If she saw something special in Blake, there must be more to him than what I'd witnessed in one slightly awkward dinner. How wrong I was. Within 6 months of meeting Blake, Jessica began to change in ways that were subtle at first, but became increasingly obvious. Our Sunday brunches, once sacred time we both protected on our calendars, became irregular. She would cancel last minute with vague excuses about work or plans with Blake. "Sorry, Mom," she would text. "Super busy weekend. Rain check." When we did meet, she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly, her conversation revolving around Blake's latest business deal or social connection. She began dropping names I didn't recognize. Wealthy clients of Blake's socialites from Boston's upper crust people, who apparently frequented the exclusive restaurants and clubs Blake now took her to. "Blake knows the owner" became a common refrain. We didn't even have to wait for a table. I tried to be supportive to show interest in this new world she was entering, but I could feel her slipping away. The daughter who once told me everything now gave brief edited highlights of a life that seemed increasingly separate from mine. One Sunday, after she had canceled our brunch 3 weeks in a row, she unexpectedly called and asked if she and Blake could come for dinner that evening. "Of course," I said, delighted at the prospect of seeing her. "I'll make that lemon chicken you love." "Actually," she hesitated, "Blake prefers his protein without sauce. Could you maybe just grill some chicken breasts? And he's avoiding gluten and dairy right now, so—" I swallowed my disappointment. "Sure, honey. Plain grilled chicken and vegetables it is." That evening was even more uncomfortable than their first visit. Blake spent most of the time on his phone, occasionally showing Jessica something that made them both laugh. An inside joke I wasn't privy to. When he did engage in conversation, it was to talk about a recent vacation to the Maldives or the new German car he was considering purchasing. "You should upgrade too, Jessica," he said, gesturing to her sensible sedan parked behind my even more modest 10-year-old Honda in the driveway. "That thing screams entry level." Jessica, who had once been proud of buying that car with her own hard-earned money, just nodded. "Blake's taking me to the dealership next weekend," she told me, not meeting my eyes. After dinner, as I was clearing the dishes, I overheard them in the living room. Blake was making comments about the furniture, the artwork, modest pieces Tom and I had collected over the years, each with its own story and meaning. "We need to get you a proper art consultant when we redecorate your place," he was saying to Jessica. "This eclectic look is very 90s suburban mom." I felt my cheeks burn as I loaded the dishwasher, trying not to let the comment sting. When they left, Jessica hugged me briefly, an awkward, perfunctory gesture that bore no resemblance to the warm embraces we used to share. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. Sorry we can't stay longer. Blake has an early meeting tomorrow with some Swiss investors." As I watched them drive away in Blake's luxury car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing my daughter to a world that had no place for me in it. The changes continued accelerating as their relationship deepened. Jessica began commenting on my clothes, my hair, my home in ways she never had before. "Mom, you really should consider updating your wardrobe," she said during a rare visit. "Those slacks are so dated. And have you thought about coloring your hair? The gray is aging you." "I earned every one of these gray hairs," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "Your teenage years gave me most of them." She didn't smile. "I'm just saying presentation matters. Blake says people make judgments within seconds of meeting you." The daughter who had once admired my authenticity, who had valued substance over style, was now concerned with appearances in a way that felt foreign. It wasn't just about me, either. She began referencing her childhood differently, emphasizing the dance lessons and private school education, while omitting the fact that Tom and I had worked extra jobs to afford those opportunities. The most painful revelation came during a fundraising gala I attended for the college where I taught. Jessica had mentioned that Blake might be there as his firm sometimes donated to educational institutions. Sure enough, I spotted them across the ballroom. Jessica stunning in an expensive-looking black dress, Blake working the room with practiced charm. I made my way toward them, excited to introduce my daughter to some of my colleagues, when I overheard her speaking to an older couple. My father was a professor of architectural engineering at MIT, she was saying smoothly. He passed away several years ago, and my mother is a published author. She writes historical fiction. I stopped cold, my hand half raised in greeting. Tom had never set foot in MIT except for the one time we took the campus tour with Jessica. And while I had published a few academic articles and dreamed of writing a novel someday, I was certainly not a published author of historical fiction. Before I could approach them, they moved to another group, leaving me standing alone, trying to process what I'd just heard. My daughter was ashamed of us, of her blue-collar father, who had worked with his hands, of her mother, who taught literature to undergraduates at a small college. She was recreating herself with a fictional pedigree that she thought would impress Blake's crowd. That night, I cried for the first time since the early days after Tom's death. Not just for myself, but for Tom, who had been so proud of his honest work, and for the daughter we raised, who had once valued that same honesty. A few weeks later, Michael flew in for a rare visit. He had been promoted at work and wanted to share the news in person. We spent a wonderful weekend together, cooking his favorite meals and catching up. On Sunday, Jessica and Blake joined us for dinner. The first time Michael would be meeting the man who had become such a significant part of his sister's life. I watched carefully as they interacted. Michael was polite but reserved his engineer's mind, seemingly assessing Blake with careful precision. Blake, for his part, seemed less interested in making a good impression on Michael than he had been with me initially. Perhaps because Michael, while successful in his field, didn't move in the wealthy circles Blake valued. After Jessica and Blake left, Michael helped me with the dishes, unusually quiet, until he finally spoke. "Mom, I'm worried about Jessica," he said, carefully drying a wine glass. "That guy, I don't think he's good for her." "You just met him," I pointed out, though I secretly agreed. "It's not just him, it's how she acts around him, like she's auditioning for a role or something." He placed the glass in the cabinet. "She barely talked about you or Dad all night. And when I brought up that summer we all went camping in the White Mountains, she changed the subject so fast it gave me whiplash." "She's excited about her new relationship," I said, trying to be fair. "People sometimes get caught up in that." Michael shook his head. "No, Mom, he's changing her. The Jessica I know would never be embarrassed about where she came from. She used to brag about how Dad could build anything with his hands. Now she's acting like having a construction worker father is something to hide." I couldn't argue with that. "I've noticed it too," I admitted. "I just don't know what to do about it." "Have you talked to her?" I nodded. "I've tried. She gets defensive, says I don't understand how things work in their social circle, that appearances matter." Michael frowned. "That doesn't sound like Jess at all." "No," I agreed sadly. "It doesn't." The next day before Michael flew back to Seattle, he hugged me tighter than usual. "Be careful, Mom," he said. "I don't trust that guy. And call me if you need anything, okay, anytime." I promised I would, grateful for his concern, but hoping it wouldn't be necessary. Maybe Jessica was just going through a phase. Maybe once the novelty of Blake's wealthy lifestyle wore off, she would remember the values that Tom and I had raised her with. But when I tried to have a heart-to-heart with her the following week, suggesting coffee at our favorite local spot, her response was dismissive. "I don't have time for this, Mom," she said impatiently. "If this is about Blake again, just stop. You're jealous that I'm happy and moving up in the world. Not everyone wants to stay in the same place their whole life." Her words stung like a physical slap. "That's not fair, Jessica. I want you to be happy. I just don't want you to lose yourself in the process." "I'm not losing myself," she snapped. "I'm becoming the person I was meant to be. Maybe you should try it sometime." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone, wondering when my supportive, loving daughter had turned into someone who could speak to me with such contempt. Jessica's engagement announcement came via text message on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing for my first lecture of the day. No phone call, no visit, just a digital message with a photo of a massive diamond ring in her finger. Blake proposed last night at Maison Laurent wedding planning begins now. So excited. I stood in my kitchen, coffee forgotten in my hand, staring at the impersonal announcement of what should have been one of the most meaningful moments of her life, and by extension, mine. Maison Laurent was one of Boston's most expensive restaurants, the kind of place where a meal cost more than my monthly car payment. Of course, that's where Blake would propose. I called her immediately, but the call went to voicemail. I left what I hoped was an appropriately enthusiastic message, fighting back the hurt that she hadn't wanted to tell me this news in person, or even hear my voice when she shared it. 3 days later, she finally called back. "Sorry I missed your call, Mom. It's been crazy with all the congratulations and starting to plan everything." "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Have you set a date yet?" "We're thinking next June at Martha's Vineyard. Blake's family has connections there. Oh, and we're having dinner with his parents this weekend. They want to meet you. Saturday at 7 at the Harbor Club." The Harbor Club was another exclusive Boston establishment known for its strict dress code and clientele of old money and new tech wealth. I immediately worried about what to wear, what to say, how to present myself to these people who clearly valued status above all. "I'll be there," I promised. "I can't wait to meet them." "Great," Jessica said, sounding distracted. "Wear something nice, okay? Blake's mom is very particular about appearances." That Saturday, I wore my best dress, a navy blue sheath I'd purchased for a faculty award ceremony the previous year, and the pearl earrings Tom had given me for our 25th anniversary. I arrived at the Harbor Club 10 minutes early, heart pounding with anxiety, as the valet took my aging Honda with a barely concealed grimace. Blake's parents, Harold and Diane Thornfield, were exactly as I had imagined them, polished, cold, and evaluating. Harold was an older version of Blake, with the same artificial smile that never reached his eyes. Diane was thin to the point of severity, her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so tight it looked painful, her jewelry subtle but clearly expensive. "So, you're Jessica's mother," Diane said, eyeing me as if I were a curious specimen. "Blake mentioned you're a teacher." "Professor, actually," I corrected gently. "English literature at Westbrook College." "How nice," she said dismissively. "Harold and I met at Princeton. I was studying art history, though I never needed to work, of course." The implication was clear. Teaching was something one did out of necessity, not choice. Throughout dinner, they made similar subtle digs, asking questions about my little house and expressing surprise that I had managed to put 2 children through college on a teacher's salary. "Jessica mentioned her father was in construction before his passing," Harold said, cutting into his steak. "Builder, was he?" "Tom was a construction foreman," I said proudly. "He managed multi-million-dollar projects all over Boston. That library your firm uses downtown, Tom supervised that build." Harold nodded vaguely, clearly unimpressed. Meanwhile, Blake and Jessica were discussing the wedding as if it were a corporate merger, all logistics and appearances. "The Vineyard Haven venue is perfect," Blake was saying. "Ocean views, exclusive access room for about 150 guests." 150? I asked, surprised. "That's quite large." Blake glanced at me with barely concealed impatience. "Actually, it's quite intimate by our standards. Many of our friends have weddings with 300-plus guests, but we want to keep it selective, just the right people." Something in his emphasis on right people made me uneasy. The conversation turned to costs, with Blake casually tossing out numbers that made me dizzy. $20,000 for the venue alone. $15,000 for flowers, $12,000 for a photographer, premium catering at $200 per head. Of course, my parents are contributing significantly, Blake said, nodding to Harold and Diane. But traditionally, the bride's family handles certain aspects. Jessica mentioned you've been saving for her wedding day. I hadn't been, actually. There was some money set aside for both children, but it was more of a general gift fund than a specific wedding account, and certainly nothing that could match the extravagant amounts being discussed. I want to help in any way I can, I said carefully, but those numbers are substantial. Well, we all want the best for Jessica's special day, Diane said with a thin smile. I'm sure you'll find a way to contribute appropriately. The remainder of this dinner passed in a blur of veiled insults and increasing anxiety on my part. When we finally parted ways, Jessica pulled me aside briefly. They liked you, she assured me, though nothing in their behavior had suggested that. And don't worry about the wedding costs. Blake and I will figure it out. But over the next few weeks, as wedding planning accelerated, it became clear that figuring it out meant expecting me to contribute far more than I could reasonably afford. Jessica began sending me links to venue options, florist portfolios, and catering menus, all with eye-watering price tags. Blake's parents are covering the rehearsal dinner and the alcohol, she informed me during a rare phone call. So we'll need to handle the venue catering, flowers, photographer, and of course my dress. The "we" struck me as particularly painful, as she had made no effort to include me in the actual planning decisions, just the financial obligations. When I gently raised concerns about the costs, suggesting some more affordable alternatives, she became defensive. "This is my one special day, Mom," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "I don't want to cut corners. Blake's friends and colleagues expect a certain standard." "What about what you want?" I asked. "Not what Blake wants, or what impresses his colleagues, but what would make you happy." "This is what I want," she insisted. "Why can't you just be supportive?" After that conversation, I spent several sleepless nights thinking about what to do. The amount Jessica expected me to contribute would essentially wipe out my retirement savings, money I had carefully preserved after Tom's death to ensure I wouldn't be a burden to my children in my old age. Yet I wanted her to have the wedding of her dreams. Despite the changes in her, despite the growing distance between us, she was still my daughter. I still remembered the little girl who had crawled into my lap after skinning her knee, the teenager who had cried in my arms after her first heartbreak, the young woman who had held my hand at Tom's funeral and promised we would get through it together. So I made a decision, one that felt both generous and terrifying. I would use a significant portion of my savings to pay for key elements of the wedding, but I would do it as a surprise. I would contact the vendors directly, make the payments, and then reveal my gift closer to the wedding date. It would be a gesture of love, a bridge across the growing divide between us. Over the next month, I secretly reached out to the vendors Jessica had mentioned most frequently. I paid the non-refundable deposit for the Vineyard Haven venue, a staggering $20,000. I contracted with the high-end florist Jessica had her heart set on committing to another $15,000. I booked the award-winning photographer whose portfolio Jessica had shared, repeatedly, putting down the required 50% deposit of $6,000. In total, I committed over $40,000, money that represented years of careful saving that was meant to help support me in my later years. But I told myself it was worth it. This was for Jessica, my only daughter. Surely when she saw what I had done, when she realized the magnitude of my sacrifice, it would help repair our relationship. I was wrong. So very, very wrong. It was a crisp October morning when Jessica texted asking to meet at our once-favorite cafe. After weeks of minimal contact, I was eager to reconnect, hoping perhaps she wanted to involve me more in the wedding plans now that they were progressing. I arrived early, ordered her favorite latte alongside my tea, and waited with cautious optimism. She arrived 20 minutes late, harried and distracted, her designer handbag thumping on the table as she sat down. "Sorry I'm late," she said, not sounding particularly sorry. "Crazy morning. Blake's mother needed my input on the rehearsal dinner seating chart." "No problem," I said, pushing her latte toward her. "I remember how hectic wedding planning can be." She took a sip of her coffee and grimaced slightly. "It's cold." "Oh, sorry. You were a bit late and I ordered when I arrived." "It's fine." She cut me off, pulling out her phone and placing it on the table. "So, I wanted to talk to you about some wedding details." My heart lifted. Finally, she wanted my input, my involvement beyond just financial contribution. "I'd love that," I said eagerly. "I've been wondering how I can help with the planning." "Great," she said, picking up her phone again and scrolling through it. "I've been working on finalizing the guest list with Blake and his parents. It's been complicated because the venue has strict capacity limits and there are so many people Blake needs to invite for business connections." She placed her phone down and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "This is the final list." I opened it expecting to see family names, old friends, people who had been part of our lives for years. Instead, it was filled with names I didn't recognize. Blake's business associates, his parents' friends, people from their social circle. "Where are our family members?" I asked, scanning the list again. "I don't see Uncle Robert or Aunt Susan or any of your cousins or Michael." "Michael will be there, of course," Jessica said quickly. "But we had to make some tough decisions. Blake's parents have a lot of important connections, and this wedding is a networking opportunity for us as well as a celebration." Something cold settled in my stomach. "A networking opportunity, Jessica. It's your wedding day." She sighed, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "It's both, Mom. That's how things work in our world. Every event is a chance to strengthen relationships that matter." "Relationships that matter," I repeated slowly. "And family relationships don't matter." "You're twisting my words," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "Of course, family matters. But we have limited space and hard decisions had to be made." I continued scanning the list, a growing sense of dread building, as I realized there was another name conspicuously absent. My own. "Jessica," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't see my name on this list." She wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly very interested in rearranging the sugar packets on the table. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." I waited, my heart pounding painfully in my chest. "Blake and I have decided to keep the wedding very intimate," she finally said, using the exact words he had used during that dinner with his parents. "Just people who fit with the aesthetic and atmosphere we're trying to create." "And I don't fit," I said flatly, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Mom, it's not like that," she protested weakly. "It's just that having parents there can be distracting. And Blake's parents will be there because they're hosting the rehearsal dinner and know all the guests. But we thought maybe you could participate in a different way." "A different way?" I echoed, feeling numb. "What way would that be, Jessica?" She brightened slightly, apparently relieved that I wasn't making a scene. "Well, we're still facing some budget challenges. The catering quote came in higher than expected, about $30,000 for the quality we want. We were hoping you might be able to help with that portion." The audacity of it struck me speechless. My daughter was uninviting me from her wedding, but still expecting me to pay for a significant portion of it. In that moment, I didn't recognize the person sitting across from me. This wasn't the Jessica I had raised, the compassionate, thoughtful young woman who had once valued family above all. "Let me understand this correctly," I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You don't want me at your wedding because I don't fit the aesthetic, but you do want my money to pay for the catering for people I don't know and will never meet." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "When you put it like that, it sounds terrible." How else should I put it? Mom, please try to understand. This wedding is really important for our future. Blake's family has certain expectations and his business associates. Stop! I cut her off, unable to bear another word about Blake's expectations or associates. Just stop, Jessica. Do you hear yourself? Do you realize what you're saying to the person who has loved you unconditionally since before you took your first breath? You're making this about you, she accused, her voice rising slightly. This is my wedding, my special day. No, I corrected her. You've made it clear this isn't about me, but it's not about you either. It's about impressing Blake's wealthy friends and business connections. It's about appearances and status and everything your father and I taught you not to value. Jessica's face hardened. Don't bring Dad into this. He would have understood. That broke something in me. Your father would be heartbroken, I said, my voice finally cracking. He would be devastated to see his daughter ashamed of her upbringing, embarrassed by her own mother, valuing money and status over genuine relationships. That's not who we raised you to be. This isn't getting us anywhere, Jessica said, grabbing her bag and standing up. I thought you would understand and want to help make my day special, but clearly you're too stuck in the past to see how important this is for my future. Jessica, wait, I called as she turned to leave. You haven't answered my question. Why would I pay for a wedding I'm not even invited to? She paused, looking back with an expression of such entitlement that it made my heart ache for the daughter I once knew. Because you're my mother, and that's what mothers do. They support their children's dreams even if they don't fully understand them. And what about what daughters do? I asked quietly. Don't they honor and respect their parents? Don't they remember the sacrifices made for them? Jessica's expression flickered for just a moment, showing a glimpse of the daughter I recognized before the mask of this new status-obsessed person slipped back into place. Blake says we need the final catering payment by next week. Let me know what you decide. And with that, she walked away, leaving me sitting alone with a cold latte, an uninvited mother expected to foot the bill for strangers to eat expensive food at my daughter's wedding. As I watched her go, I thought about the venue deposit, the flowers, the photographer, all those secret payments I had made wanting to surprise her with my generosity. Now I was the one surprised, blindsided by my own daughter's callousness. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. A line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. A boundary had been violated that couldn't be ignored. I pulled out my phone and began making calls. It was time to take back my self-respect, even if it meant making one of the hardest decisions of my life. I walked home from the cafe in a daze, the fall leaves crunching beneath my feet. Unnoticed, the crisp air failing to clear the fog of shock and hurt that enveloped me. By the time I reached my house, the modest home where I had raised my children, where Tom and I had built our life together, Mom, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Once inside, I sank onto the sofa, the same one where Jessica had curled up with me to watch movies as a child, where she had cried after her first breakup, where we had hugged and grieved together after Tom's funeral. Now she was ashamed to claim me as her mother, unwilling to have me at her wedding, but expecting me to finance it. The pain was physical, a constriction in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How had we gotten here? When had my loving, compassionate daughter turned into someone who could hurt me so deeply without remorse? After several minutes of sitting in stunned silence, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. Michael. Despite our sometimes a distant relationship, he had always been straightforward, honest, and fundamentally kind, qualities that seemed increasingly rare in his sister. He answered on the second ring. Mom, everything okay? You never call during work hours. The concern in his voice nearly broke me. I tried to explain what had happened, but halfway through the tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Through sobs, I managed to convey the essence. Jessica didn't want me at her wedding, but expected me to help pay for it. She did what? Michael's voice rose in disbelief. Tell me you're joking. I wish I were, I said, wiping my eyes. She said I don't fit the aesthetic they're going for. Michael was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but vibrating with anger. That's the most entitled, ungrateful thing I've ever heard. And you've been paying for parts of this wedding already, without telling her. Yes, I admitted. The venue flowers photographer. Over $40,000 in deposits. I wanted it to be a surprise gift. Mom, Michael's voice softened. That was incredibly generous of you. But Jessica doesn't deserve that kind of sacrifice if she's treating you this way. What are you going to do? It was the question I'd been asking myself since leaving the cafe. What was I going to do? I had options. I could swallow my pride, pay for the catering as Jessica requested, and accept my exclusion from one of the most important days of my daughter's life. I could refuse to pay for the catering but leave my other contributions in place, a silent gift she would discover eventually. Or I could withdraw completely, cancel the payments I'd made, reclaim whatever deposits I could, and let Jessica and Blake figure out how to create their aesthetic wedding without my financial support. I don't know yet, I told Michael honestly. Part of me wants to teach her a lesson, but another part still sees her as my little girl who needs my support. Mom, listen to me, Michael said firmly. This isn't about teaching Jessica a lesson. This is about you respecting yourself enough not to be used. If Jessica wants to exclude you from her wedding, that's her choice. A terrible one, but hers to make. But she cannot expect you to finance that exclusion. That's not support, that's exploitation. His words hit home, crystallizing the discomfort I'd been feeling. This wasn't about punishing Jessica. It was about maintaining my own dignity and self-respect. You're right, I said quietly. I can't pay for a wedding I'm not welcome to attend. It would be self-destructive. So what will you do about the deposits you've already paid? I took a deep breath, the path forward suddenly clear. I'm going to cancel them. All of them. Yes, I'll call right now and see what can be refunded. If Jessica and Blake want this exclusive status symbol wedding, they'll have to fund it themselves. Do you want me to come out there? Michael offered. I can get a flight tonight. No, honey. Stay and finish your project. I'll be okay. This is something I need to handle myself. After we hung up, I spent a moment gathering my courage before making the first call, to the venue coordinator at Vineyard Haven. I explained my situation as calmly as I could, asking what portion of my deposit might be refundable. Mrs. Morgan, I'm so sorry to hear about this situation, the coordinator said sympathetically. Given the circumstances, we can refund 60% of your deposit, but I'm afraid the rest is non-refundable per our contract terms. $8,000 gone, but $12,000 coming back. It was better than nothing. The florist was more accommodating, offering a full refund minus a small administrative fee, since they had plenty of time to book another June wedding. The photographer, upon hearing my situation, was incredibly understanding. I've seen family dynamics get complicated around weddings before, she said kindly. I'll refund your entire deposit. And between us, I'm not sure I would have enjoyed photographing a wedding where the bride's mother wasn't welcome. By late afternoon, I had reclaimed nearly $30,000 of my original investment. The rest was lost, but I considered it the price of a valuable lesson about boundaries and self-respect. As I sat at my kitchen table looking at the confirmations of my cancellations, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. Relief that I had stood up for myself, grief for the relationship with my daughter that seemed irreparably damaged, fear about what would happen next. But underlying it all was a surprising sense of peace. For perhaps the first time since Tom died, I had made a difficult decision completely on my own, guided by what I knew to be right rather than what would please others. I composed a brief text to Jessica. I've thought about your request. I cannot in good conscience pay for a wedding I'm not invited to attend. Furthermore, I've canceled the venue floral and photography arrangements I had previously paid for as a surprise gift. I love you, but I need to respect myself too. When you're ready to talk, really talk, about what's happened to our relationship, I'll be here. My finger hovered over the send button for several long moments before I finally pressed it, knowing there would be no going back. Then I turned off my phone, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in the growing darkness of my living room, wondering what storm would break when Jessica read my message. The storm, when it came, was even more violent than I had anticipated. My phone, when I turned it back on the following morning, was filled with missed calls, voicemails, and texts, mostly from Jessica, but also several from Blake and even his parents. Jessica's initial messages were disbelieving. "Mom, tell me you're joking. This isn't funny. Call me back right now." As the hours had passed with no response from me, her tone had shifted to anger. "I can't believe you would sabotage my wedding like this. After everything I've done for you, Blake is furious." The final messages had turned to threats and manipulation. "If you don't fix this immediately, I'm cutting you out of my life for good." "Is that what you want? To never see me again, to never meet your grandchildren?" Blake's messages were more direct. "Your behavior is appalling and selfish. You've ruined what was supposed to be the happiest day of Jessica's life. We expected better from you." The most surprising communications came from Harold and Diane Thornfield. Harold had left a terse voicemail suggesting I was potentially liable for breach of contract, since Jessica had been counting on those vendor arrangements. Diane's message was icily polite but threatening. "We're extremely disappointed in your choices, Eileen. This reflects very poorly on you and affects how our entire social circle will view your family. I suggest you reconsider before irreparable damage is done." I deleted them all, without responding, then brewed a strong cup of coffee and prepared for the confrontation I knew was coming. Sure enough, just after 9, there was a pounding at my front door. When I opened it, Jessica stood there, her face flushed with anger, Blake looming behind her with his arms crossed. Without waiting for an invitation, they pushed past me into the living room. "How could you do this?" Jessica demanded, whirling to face me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I closed the door calmly and turned to face them. "I made a decision based on the information you gave me yesterday. You don't want me at your wedding, but you expect me to pay for it. That's not acceptable to me." "You're twisting everything," Jessica cried. "I never said I didn't want you there. You said, and I quote, that you wanted to keep the wedding intimate with people who fit the aesthetic, and that I would be a distraction." I reminded her, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. "You literally showed me a guest list that didn't include my name." "That's not what I meant," she protested, though her eyes slid away from mine. "Then what did you mean, Jessica? Please enlighten me." Blake stepped forward, his handsome face tight with barely controlled anger. "Jessica was trying to be considerate of your feelings. A high society wedding might make you uncomfortable. She was protecting you." "By excluding me?" I asked incredulously. "That's an interesting definition of protection." "This is exactly why we made the decision we did," Blake snapped. "You're being difficult and making this all about you when it should be about Jessica's happiness." "Blake," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've spent my entire adult life putting Jessica's happiness first. I've supported her dreams, celebrated her successes, comforted her failures. I would do almost anything for her, but I will not finance a wedding I'm not welcome to attend. That's where I draw the line." "You had no right to cancel those vendors," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "You knew how important they were to us." "I had every right," I countered. "My name was on those contracts. I paid those deposits with my money that was meant for my retirement. that I sacrificed because I wanted to give you a beautiful wedding. But a wedding is about more than beautiful flowers and a scenic venue. It's about celebrating love with the people who matter most. Apparently, I don't fall into that category for you anymore. That's not fair. Jessica's voice cracked slightly. Blake's family has certain expectations. They're contributing a lot to our future. I was just trying to balance everyone's needs. Everyone's needs except mine, I noted. And if Blake's family has such high expectations and is so concerned about appearances, surely they can cover the costs of the wedding too. Blake's face darkened. My parents are already covering the rehearsal dinner and alcohol. It's traditional for the bride's family to handle the wedding itself. Traditionally, the bride's mother is also invited to the wedding, I pointed out. You can't cherry-pick which traditions suit you. Jessica made a frustrated sound. We can still fix this. Call the vendors back, tell them it was a misunderstanding. No, I said simply. I won't do that. What do you want from me? She demanded. An apology. Fine. I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. Now will you please call them back? The insincerity of her apology, offered not out of genuine remorse, but as a transaction to get what she wanted, broke my heart all over again. This isn't about hurt feelings, Jessica. This is about respect. Basic human respect. You've shown me none. You've been ashamed of me, embarrassed by me, and now you've excluded me from one of the most significant days of your life, but still expect me to pay for it. That's not love. That's not even basic decency. So you're punishing me, she accused, ruining my wedding because you're jealous of the life I'm building with Blake. I'm not punishing you, I said wearily. I'm simply refusing to participate in my own humiliation. If you and Blake want an exclusive high society wedding that I'm not good enough to attend, you'll need to pay for it yourselves. Blake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening tone. My father thinks we might have grounds for a lawsuit. You made commitments to vendors on our behalf and then maliciously canceled them. I almost laughed at the absurdity. I made no commitments on your behalf. I made payments with my own money as a gift you've made clear you don't want if it comes with the giver attached. As for malice, there was none. Just a mother finally recognizing when her love is being taken advantage of. Mom, please. Jessica's voice took on a pleading quality. We're supposed to get married in 8 months. All the best venues are booked. We'll never find another place like Vineyard Haven. That's unfortunate, I acknowledged. But it's a problem you and Blake will need to solve together. Perhaps it's the first test of your partnership, figuring out how to create a meaningful wedding day without using my money. You're being ridiculous, Blake snapped. Jessica, we're wasting our time here. Your mother has made her position clear. And is that it then? Jessica asked, tears finally appearing in her eyes. You're just abandoning me, throwing away our relationship over one disagreement. Her attempt to reframe her exclusion of me from her wedding as a simple disagreement was the final straw. I'm not abandoning you, Jessica. I'm standing up for myself. There's a difference. And I'm not throwing away our relationship. You did that when you decided I wasn't good enough to be seen at your wedding, but was still good enough to foot the bill. Blake took Jessica's arm. Come on, we need to start making calls to find another venue. As they moved toward the door, I called after them. Jessica. She paused but didn't turn around. I love you. I always will. When you're ready to have a real conversation about what's happened between us, I'll be here. She said nothing, allowing Blake to usher her out. The door closed behind them with a finality that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of my home. I stood there for a long moment waiting for the breakdown I was sure would come. But instead, I felt an unexpected calm. I had stood my ground, maintained my dignity, and spoken my truth. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. I had no illusions that this was the end of the matter, however. And I was right. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. Blake's father called my department chair at the college, attempting to cause trouble for me professionally. Fortunately, my chair was both understanding and appropriately outraged at this tactic. Diane Thornfield somehow obtained the contact information for several of my friends and called them with sob stories about how I was destroying Jessica's special day. Most distressingly, Jessica herself began a campaign of emotional manipulation, alternating between tearful pleas, angry accusations, and cold silence. She enlisted Michael, calling him in Seattle to give her version of events, though he later told me he had seen through her immediately. She tried to make it sound like you arbitrarily canceled everything out of spite, he reported during our next call. When I pressed her about not inviting you to the wedding, she got flustered and changed the subject. How did you leave things with her? I asked. I told her I love her, but that she's in the wrong here, he said simply, and that if she excludes you from her wedding, I won't be attending either. Michael, no, I protested. You should be there for your sister. Mom, there are some things you can't compromise on. Basic respect for our parents is one of them. Dad would have done the same. His mention of Tom brought fresh tears to my eyes. Thank you, I whispered, for understanding, for standing with me. Always, he promised. And Mom, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't easy. There were moments of crippling doubt nights when I lay awake wondering if I had made a terrible mistake that would permanently fracture my relationship with my daughter. But each time Jessica or Blake or his parents attempted another manipulation tactic, I became more certain I had made the right choice. Their behavior confirmed everything I had feared about the influence they were having on my daughter. About 2 weeks after the confrontation at my house, I received an email from Blake's mother. The tone was markedly different from her previous communications, less threatening, more conciliatory, though still condescending. Dear Eileen, she wrote, I believe we may have started off on the wrong foot. Blake and Jessica are very stressed about finding a new venue and vendors on short notice. Perhaps we could discuss a compromise. Harold and I would be willing to extend a personal invitation to you for the wedding, if you would reconsider your position on the financial arrangements. After all, we all want what's best for Jessica's special day. I read the email twice, noting the careful phrasing. They would extend a personal invitation, as if my attendance at my own daughter's wedding was a privilege they could bestow, rather than a fundamental expectation. And they wanted me to reconsider my position on the financial arrangements, a polite way of asking me to pay for everything again. My reply was brief and direct. Thank you for your email. I appreciate the gesture, but I must decline. My presence at Jessica's wedding should not be contingent on financial contribution, and my financial contribution should not be expected in the absence of my presence. I wish Jessica and Blake all the best as they plan their day, according to their own values and means. I didn't hear from Diane again, but a week later Jessica called. Her voice was subdued, lacking the entitled anger of our previous interactions. We've found another venue, she said without preamble. It's smaller in the Berkshires instead of the vineyard. The wedding will be in August, now, not June. I'm glad you found a solution, I said carefully, unsure where this conversation was heading. There was a pause. Then, it's costing a lot less. Blake's parents are covering most of it. That's good, I offered when she didn't continue. Another long pause. Mom, She started, then stopped. This isn't how I imagined my wedding would be. I know, sweetheart, I said gently. I didn't imagine it this way either. Blake says we don't need you there. She continued, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. He says it's better to make a clean break. The words stung, but I wasn't surprised. And what do you say, Jessica? I don't know anymore, she admitted, and I heard the confusion in her voice. Everything's happening so fast, and Blake and his parents have such strong opinions. Sometimes I feel like I'm just going along with what everyone else wants. It was the first genuine moment we'd shared in months, a brief glimpse of the Jessica I knew. Thoughtful, introspective, capable of self-awareness. But before I could respond, I heard Blake's voice in the background, asking who she was talking to. "I have to go," Jessica said quickly. "We'll talk later." But we didn't talk later. The call ended and the silence returned. I didn't push, didn't reach out again. The ball was in Jessica's court now. I had made my position clear, had drawn my line in the sand. All I could do was wait and see if my daughter would find her way back across it. 6 months passed like a slow turning page each day, bringing me further from the person I had been. A mother who placed her children's needs above her own to the point of self-erasure, and closer to the woman I needed to become, someone who honored her own worth while still leaving room for reconciliation. I threw myself into my work at the college, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of lectures and office hours, in the bright minds of my students, who reminded me daily of the joy of genuine connection. I joined a widow's support group that I had been avoiding for years, finding unexpected strength in the company of women who understood the particular loneliness of rebuilding a life alone. On Sundays, when Jessica and I had once shared our weekly brunches, I began a new tradition of long walks in the Boston Public Garden, sometimes alone with my thoughts, sometimes with friends I had reconnected with. There was pain in these new routines, each one a reminder of what had been lost, but also a gradual healing, a reclaiming of my time and space. Michael called more frequently than he ever had before, as if trying to fill the void left by his sister's absence. He flew out for a long weekend in March, and we spent it rediscovering Boston together, visiting museums and restaurants, talking more openly than we had in years. "You seem different, Mom," he observed as we strolled along the harbor one evening. "Stronger, somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Some days are still hard, but I'm learning to trust my own judgment again." "Have you heard from Jess at all?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not since that brief call about the new venue. Have you—" "She texts occasionally. Very surface-level stuff. I invited her to come visit me in Seattle. Thought maybe away from Blake and his parents, she might, I don't know, remember who she used to be, but she always has an excuse." The sadness in his voice mirrored my own. "We can't force her to see what's happening, Michael. She has to come to that realization herself." "If she ever does," he said quietly, "all we can do is keep the door open." I replied, though sometimes I wondered if that door would ever be walked through again. April brought news via a mutual friend that Jessica and Blake had indeed gotten married in a small ceremony in the Berkshires, attended only by Blake's family and friends. The knowledge that my daughter had married without me there, without even telling me it was happening, pierced me with a pain so acute I had to take a day off from teaching, unable to face my students, with my grief so raw and visible. But life continued. Spring turned to summer, the days growing longer and warmer. I tended my garden, hosted small dinner parties for colleagues, started planning a solo trip to England for the fall, something Tom and I had always talked about doing someday. Then, on a humid August afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized Jessica's handwriting immediately. With trembling fingers, I opened it, not sure what to expect. Perhaps a formal announcement of the wedding that had already taken place, or worse, a final severing of ties. Instead, I found 3 handwritten pages, the ink smudged into places as if tears had fallen while she wrote. "Mom," it began simply. "I don't know if you'll read this or if you should. I've been so awful to you that I wouldn't blame you if you tore this up without opening it, but I hope you won't. I got married 2 months ago. It wasn't the wedding I dreamed of. Nothing about it felt right. Michael refused to come. He said he couldn't celebrate a marriage that began with such disrespect toward you. I was angry at him then, but now I understand. Things with Blake aren't what I thought they would be. Actually, that's not true. There were warning signs all along. His controlling nature, his obsession with status, the way he isolated me from you and my friends. I just didn't want to see them. Or maybe I saw them but thought I could change him, or that the good parts outweighed the bad. Since the wedding, it's gotten worse. He monitors my spending checks, my phone questions where I've been, if I'm late coming home from work. His parents are constantly interfering, telling me how to decorate our apartment, what to wear to social functions, even suggesting I change jobs to something more suitable for Blake's wife. Last week we had dinner with a couple Blake knows from his club. The wife asked about my family and I started to answer honestly. About Dad being a construction foreman, about you teaching literature. Blake cut me off and gave this completely fabricated story about Dad being an architect and you being some famous author. When I confronted him later, he said my actual background was embarrassing and that I needed to play along for his career. It was like a veil lifted. Suddenly I could see clearly what I've become, someone who would exclude her own mother from her wedding, to please a man who's ashamed of her family. Someone who would lie about her father, her wonderful, hard-working father, who would have done anything for her. Someone who barely recognizes herself anymore. I don't know what to do now. I'm not asking for advice or help. I don't deserve either from you. I just wanted you to know that you were right. About everything. And I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused you. You deserved so much better from your daughter. The letter ended there unsigned, as if she couldn't bring herself to claim the person she had become by attaching her name to it. I sat on my porch steps for a long time, the letter in my lap, watching the afternoon light shift through the leaves of the old maple tree Tom had planted when we first bought the house. My emotions were a tangled mess. Vindication that my concerns about Blake had been justified heartbreak for my daughter's unhappiness, uncertainty about what to do next. After careful consideration, I texted her, "I received your letter. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. No judgment, no, I told you so. Just love. Always." 3 days later, she called. Our conversation was halting at first, weighted with all that had happened between us. But gradually, as the afternoon light faded into evening, we began to rebuild the bridge that had seemed so thoroughly burned. "Can we meet?" she asked eventually. "Somewhere neutral. I understand if you don't want me in your house after everything." "How about that cafe we used to love?" I suggested. "Sunday morning, like old times." There was a catch in her voice when she replied, "I'd like that, very much." That Sunday, I arrived at the cafe early, just as I had for our fateful meeting 6 months earlier. But this time, when I ordered Jessica's favorite latte alongside my tea, it was with hope rather than anxiety. She arrived on time looking both familiar and changed, thinner with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal, but still my beautiful daughter. She slid into the seat across from me, accepting the latte with a small smile of recognition. "You remembered my order," she said softly. "Some things you don't forget," I replied. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of all that had happened hanging between us. Then simultaneously, we both began to speak. "I'm so sorry. I've missed you." We stopped, laughed awkwardly. Then Jessica gestured for me to continue. "I've missed you," I repeated simply. "Every day. I've missed you too." She admitted, her eyes filling with tears. "More than I can say." She told me more about her marriage, how Blake's charming facade had crumbled once they were legally bound, how his control had extended to every aspect of her life. His parents treated her like a project, to be molded rather than a person to be respected. The friends she had once enjoyed were deemed unsuitable, replaced by Blake's circle of wealthy but emotionally shallow acquaintances. I don't recognize my life anymore, she confessed, or myself in it. What do you want to do? I asked, resisting the urge to tell her what I thought she should do. This had to be her decision. She twisted her wedding ring, an enormous diamond that looked heavy on her slender finger. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to leave immediately, but another part feels like I should try harder, like maybe if I just find the right way to talk to him. Whatever you decide, I told her. I'll support you. Not financially, I added with a small smile, but emotionally. I'm here for you, Jessica. I always have been. Even after what I did, she asked, her voice breaking. Excluding you from my wedding, all those horrible things I said, even after that, I confirmed. Love doesn't disappear because of hurt, though it might change shape for a while. But Jessica, I added, needing to be completely honest, supporting you doesn't mean I'll enable choices that harm you or allow myself to be disrespected again. I've learned that lesson. She nodded slowly. I understand. And you were right to stand your ground. If you had given in, paid for everything despite being excluded, I don't think I would have ever seen how wrong I was. Sometimes the kindest thing isn't the easiest thing. Her insight surprised and moved me. Perhaps this painful journey had brought her wisdom she wouldn't have gained otherwise. We talked for hours that day, beginning the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust and understanding. I didn't push her to leave Blake, though every maternal instinct urged me to get her away from him immediately. Instead, I listened, asked gentle questions, and reminded her of the strong, independent woman she had once been, could be again. As we parted with a long, tight hug, the first real embrace we'd shared in over a year, Jessica whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me even when I gave up on us." Never, I promised. Some bonds can bend almost to breaking, but they don't have to break. In the months that followed, Jessica and I continued to meet regularly, our relationship healing gradually, like a bone that had been broken and reset. She began therapy, started reconnecting with old friends, and slowly reclaimed pieces of her authentic self that had been suppressed during her relationship with Blake. By Thanksgiving, she had moved out of the apartment she shared with Blake and into a small place of her own. By Christmas, she had filed for divorce, withstanding the pressure and threats from Blake and his parents, with a strength that made me fiercely proud. Michael flew in for the holidays, and for the first time in years, we were together as a family again. Not unchanged, not unmarked by what had happened, but whole in a new way, tempered by difficulty into something perhaps stronger than before. As we sat around my dining table sharing memories of Christmases past and hopes for the future, I thought about the journey we had all taken. The painful choice I had made to cancel those wedding vendors had seemed like an ending at the time, the closing of a door. Instead, it had become a beginning, the start of a path toward greater authenticity, stronger boundaries, and deeper understanding for all of us. Sometimes love means standing firm when it would be easier to give in. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most necessary growth. And sometimes what feels like a devastating loss becomes in time the foundation for something more genuine and enduring than what came before. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your dignity or self-respect, especially with someone you love, I hope this story resonates with you. Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else facing a similar challenge. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. And if you know someone struggling with boundaries in a relationship, please share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these painful choices makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that you deserve respect, especially from the people who claim to love you. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. And it's never too late to reclaim your worth.